Hello and welcome. It's time for Magnus Protocol, Episode 6, Introductions. I've been told calling them episodes is not completely correct because it's not something that you watch, and it's just a habit that I have, a holdover from the Magnus archives. We're going to keep going with it, and, you know, nothing else that sets us apart, right? Episode 6, Introductions.
Welcome to the full spectrum. We have so much to share.
We're going to start off here, as always, with the case number, with the number that's been assigned to it, CAT-1RB48224-090-22024-120-22024, injury, brackets, needles, hyphen, intimidation, brackets, 999 call. And so I'm going to start adding in all the extra bits at the end too, because they're an important part of the classification. I was about to say important part. Look, it's been a long week. I'm losing my voice. We're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through this. I really liked this episode, but I started off really liking this episode with the dedication. The dedication was incredibly sweet, but also very poignant. Of, you know, I found the meaning within myself that I needed to have, and yeah, just very, very good. Like that dedication a lot. As always, we're going to start this with a review of the episode, just focused on the Magnus Protocol stuff. And then in the second half, we will cover all of the Magnus Archive stuff as well. So just keep that in mind. If you're only here for my thoughts on how this pertains to the Magnus Archives, you're going to have to wait just a minute, but we're going to get there. The episode starts with Sam falling asleep. He's not used to working nights yet, and it's starting to cause a little bit of trouble for him. He's warned by Alice that he should have gotten the blackout curtains that she mentioned before, but she also says something very, very interesting.
Oh, Sam, the sun is the enemy. It rules the world of light, but we who dwell in darkness feel only its wrath.
And this is almost assuredly a red herring, right? But what if it's not? We'll get into it with Magnus Archive stuff, but just keep that in mind. Alice has mentioned multiple times how she's been down here so long that she doesn't know if she can go back, or she's going to die down here. That there's things that are starting to fall into place. We're going to come back to that in the spoiler section. After that, we get word that there's a new hire. And Sam asks the question, was somebody else leaving? And Alice says, nah, whenever somebody tries to go, whenever one of the other older members leaves, Lena always hires a couple extra people just in case somebody doesn't hack it, which makes sense. And then we get a case file played from the computer. And this one is a killer. This is the case file, and the transcript gives us here that it is a cyber file, and then in a 999 call. Needles, absolutely wonderful. Needles brought back some of the joy that some of the very specific characters in the Magnus Archives brought on for me, and I love Needles already. Needles is a terrible person in many ways, but Needles is torturing a man who is full of needles, and whenever Needles finds out that emergency services can't just pick out where they are right away on mobile, Needles immediately is like, oh, we'll call you back later then. We're gonna have a little bit more time. Just the voice acting, the portrayal, absolutely incredible. Very gripping, very chilling, especially in certain parts here. I think that this was really, really good and really, really well done. Well written too, because the back and forth between Needles and the operators feels very natural, especially later on when the second operator mentions that he doesn't really have a fear of Needles. And you can hear the exasperation in Needles' voice. It's really, really good. It's done super well. But there's a couple things I wanted to call out here as well. After they've decided to call the police, Needles reveals this little statement, wonderful thing. I don't quite know how to put it here.
Of course it hurts. How couldn't it? But I've come to rather enjoy the pain by now. All those teeny tiny holes, bright and sharp.
So, it's hard to talk about this in just the Magnus Protocol side, but there's definitely something supernatural, it seems, going on with Needles, right? And then we get this line when asked about, like, well, where you are, like, where are you? How well do you know the land, you know?
Oh, the land is definitely marked now. Same as me. And it feels good. It satisfies in a way I never really thought anything would. It fills that hollow, lonely hole inside quite nicely. It's not sadism or masochism. I tried both of those already. I think it's the fear, the look in their eyes once they realize their mistake. It just makes me want to hold them close. So I do.
The idea of this killer on the streets that has covered themselves in needles, and I say that because you can hear the rattling of the needles at times, that lives as like a human Iron Maiden for needles, and just comes up and cuddles you, hugs you nice and close, and makes sure to shift around so the needles get into your face and into your eyes. It's absolutely horrifying. It triggers a couple different fears, right? Like tryptophobia, the obviously the fear of needles itself. There's a bunch of stuff that just immediately made me go like, whoa, I love it. And then whenever the operator, there's a lot of good little stuff in there. I'm not just trying to recap every part of the episode. I just want to bring up the things that really stood out to me. Needles priding himself on, making the night a little bit more dangerous than it used to be. But there's a really wonderful part here where the operator tries to pass the phone over to his supervisor, and Needles gets very aggressive and very serious all of a sudden, and the static kind of picks up. And there's a moment where I thought the static kind of picked up later, but I think it might just be that Needles is moving the phone then. But either way, just this idea of this jovial, fun, cracking jokes killer that suddenly just goes, if you hang up that phone, I will just... Ooh. Really, really worked. The voice acting is incredible in this episode. And then that moment where the operator accidentally reveals which center they're at. And Needles gets so excited that the phone shifts and you hear that as the cell phone is moving and just says, Lambeth then. And you can hear the smile in the voice. It's so good. It's so good. Then, as the operator does finally give into that fear, gives up the call, right? Transfers the call. And it definitely seems like Needles is feeding on the fear here. It definitely seems like the fear is giving Needles pleasure and enjoyment, but also it seems almost like they mentioned that it's the smell of the fear is better than the smell of the aftershave, right? It's drowned out the smell of the aftershave. And so it really feels like this is absolutely a being that feeds on fear. And I'm being vague for the sake of people that haven't listened to Magnus Archives yet. You really need to. We're not going to be able to keep up this half and half review style forever. Anyway, after the operator transfers the call, and Needles reminds them right before they do that we had a deal, Sam, Alice, and Gwen get to meet the new hire, Celia. And I have so many thoughts. But for now, we're going to focus on the mini donuts. And these mini donuts could also be a red herring, but there's something really interesting here about the fact that everybody's talking about the mini donuts, and then Lena is like, yeah, just make sure you eat them on site. Make sure, when you eat them, you eat them on site. And it could absolutely just be, hey, the team is all gathered together. They work in this dark environment, midnight, graveyard shifts, right? They are 100% just enjoying the little joys of life. But it also could be that there's something special about those mini donuts since Lena brings them out every time there's a new hire. Just saying, it could be a red herring, could not be. Celia mentions that she doesn't scare easy these days when Sam tries to warn her. Get to that in a minute. But also we have the CCTV turning to look at them in the break room. Alice teasing Sam about maybe liking Celia, and Sam getting defensive about it. But then like a genuinely nice moment where Alice and Sam get to just talk about when they were students before they go back to work. There's a little thing here too where Sam wanted to know more about Needles. Like Sam was getting invested in it. And it made me think of a certain archivist and how invested the archivist would get in stories sometimes and be surprised that that was it. That's all they had and wanting to know more. And it also, feeds into something else there. Because this is not the first time that Sam has tried to follow up on statements and wanted to know more. And then just a little, Alice calling Lena Big Bird. It was a fun episode. We're not going to hold off anymore. I can't hold off anymore. We have to talk about Magnus Archive stuff. So again, and this might be the last time we're able to do it, if you have not listened to the Magnus Archives, you need to go back and listen to the Magnus Archives. And I say listen to because there's been some people in the comments giving me a little playful ribbing about the fact that I keep saying watch, and it's a show that you listen to. Go back and listen to the Magnus Archives, because if what is happening in this episode is what I think is happening, you can't hold off anymore. You need to go back and listen to it, please. And so, for everybody else that I know has already and has been waiting desperately for this, why is Celia here? Okay, so Celia, for anybody that might have forgotten from Magnus Archives, Celia was originally, and it might not be the same Celia, but I'm almost positive it is, has the same voice actress. She mentions that she doesn't scare so easy these days. She's attached to the Magnus Institute in a way that I don't know if originally she meant to. Anyway, Celia was originally a woman named Lynn Hammond. She came to the Magnus Institute in Magnus Archives in episode 100. Might have been 101. Hold on, I'll look it up and make sure. I don't want to give anybody the wrong information. It was episode 100. Okay, awesome. Feels good to actually remember that, right? Which was I guess you had to be there, which was one of my favorite episodes from all of the Magnus Archives. It was everybody else that didn't have John's powers trying to get statements out of people. And Lynn Hammond was the girl that talked to Martin that was seeing a ghost of a young woman on fire, and that it was even able to singe her arm and singe some of the hair on her arm. Lynn assumed she was going to get paid for it, and she didn't. You say, well, how did she come to be known Celia? Well, just again, in case you might have forgotten, Lynn Hammond was put in a domain after the apocalypse. She was put into a domain where post the change, I think is what you're supposed to call it. But she was put into a domain where she lost her name. And she also seems to have lost some of her memories, because when she does meet John and Martin again after Melanie and Georgie have saved her, and she joins their cult, she doesn't recognize Martin, even though Martin was the one that wound up giving her change, basically, for her statement. If this is the same person, it would explain why she says that she doesn't scare so easily anymore. If it's just this universe's version of her, is it possible that they are affected by what happened to the versions of them in previous universes? And I don't mean like every little bit of it happened to them, right? But what if, and this is just theory, what if like visions, dreams, anything like that have seeped in, or even just a feeling of like, hey, I overcame my fear with the help of these people, or I fought against my fear, and that has made this version of Celia more courageous. Obviously, we're going to need more time to be able to see how different this version of Celia is. She acts similarly to our version of Celia, maybe a little bit more outspoken, but Lynn Hammond was a lot more reticent, maybe a lot more nonplussed, and this Celia acts a little bit more like the Celia from the post-change cult with Melanie and Georgie. Then we also have the fact that Needles is very obviously an avatar, which tells us before we were going, hey, well, is there avatars? Do avatars still exist? Needles is definitely an avatar, feeding off fear. There's no way that one of the fears is making a call, right, to 999, so to emergency services. So this definitely feels like an avatar. I feel like an avatar of the slaughter, but it could also be an avatar of the flesh. maybe even an avatar of the corruption because of the tiny holes, tryptophobia, but I feel like it's probably an avatar of the slaughter. This tells us that also the man with the sack was not definitely, I guess, but he was almost assuredly an avatar. And the first thing I thought of with Needles was Michael. And it made me so happy again to have another character like that around, just cracking jokes, doing terrible things, but cracking jokes, having a good time, you know. I was so stoked about this. And then we have Alice's comment that makes me think that Alice could be an avatar of the dark. We got a lot of information this time. And I want to mention now, I didn't mention it before, but in the transcript, when Alice says enemy talking about the sun, it is underlined in the transcript, which definitely stood out to me. We got a lot from this. Needles enjoying the fear and savoring the fear. Celia being here. I feel like the mini donuts. It's important. But then, of course, also Alice's comments. There's still a lot we don't know, right? There's still a lot we're trying to figure out. But it really feels to me like we are getting more information each time that is recontextualizing. Obviously, everything we already knew, but also a lot of the theories, right? If this is a fractured fears, like I was talking about with my theory before, or a blended fears, like I was talking about with my theory before, then this could be a mix of slaughter or flesh and corruption, right? But if where my theory of before of, you know, well, the fears are for obsessions, or it wasn't my theory, but you know what I mean, the theory from before, the fears are obsessions, and maybe then my theory that the avatars would be the actual fear as compared to the other way around, where the fears were fear, the entities were fear, and the avatars were desire. This really seems like he cares about fear a lot. Needles is very upset when the operator's not afraid of him. So that could still be, right? Whereas the avatars we saw before, it didn't really seem like they cared if people were afraid of them. It seemed more like they wanted people to be afraid of the fear of the entity itself and what it could do to them, and then they transferred that fear over and got a little bit of it for themselves, it seemed like. But here, we don't really get anything about an entity that Needles is serving, and it seems more like Needles just wants the fear for himself. And so, it's very possible that they've inverted. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I am really curious what you think. I don't think the big bird thing is going to be a red herring. I just want to throw this in right at the end. What if Lena is like an owl in service of the eye? Just keep that in the back of your mind, somewhere close to your heart, so that in 100 episodes when that happens, you can know that Big Bird was not a red herring. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum that the Magnus Protocol has to offer.
Welcome to the full spectrum.